amount of airtime.
Hello, welcome to Newswatch with me, Samira Ahmed. The Boston bomb attacks were dramatic and significant, but did they get so much coverage because they took place on American soil? It's not man bites dog, just footballer bites footballer. So was this really worth all the attention it was given? And one viewer tells us he loves all the activity going on in the new newsroom backdrop. It's just a shame the newsreader has to get in the way.
Can't you just ask her to move over to one side, so we really can see the set properly?
What's a life worth in terms of television airtime? It may seem a brutal question to ask, but a string of deaths from violent attacks and natural disasters over the past couple of weeks has forced news editors to decide what priority to give to each of them. About 300 people were killed when a building collapsed in Bangladesh on Wednesday. This followed Saturday's earthquake in China, after which over 200 people were reported dead or missing. 35 casualties of last week's earthquake in Iran. 14 killed in the blast at a fertilizer plant in Texas, and of course ongoing fatal bomb attacks in Iraq and Syria. Allocating time and resources to these events clearly isn't just a numbers game, though, as one dramatic attack killing just 3 people has dominated BBC News over the last fortnight.
This should have been a moment of celebration for runners finishing the marathon. Instead, there was confusion and then horror.
Surveillance footage shows 2 men with backpacks walking together amongst the crowd. One man is wearing a dark baseball cap, the other a white baseball cap. The man with the white cap was then caught talking on a cell phone near the site of the second explosion.
A massive police operation overnight in a suburb of Boston. Officers searching street by street for one of the suspected marathon bombers. He apparently escaped after a car chase and shootout.
No one could have imagined it would end like this, the late-night climax of an extraordinary week, as the suspect in the Boston bombing was cornered, shot and driven away bleeding.
This was all too much for some viewers, including Andy Parker, who wrote, "Once it became clear that this was an isolated attack rather than the start of a wave of global terrorism, I think it was time to tone things down." And a viewer called Phil added, "Keeping it alive in the press like this just aggrandizes the terrorists and their buddies. How many hundreds have died in bombings in Iraq just this week?" Others also drew a comparison with the reporting of other foreign stories, with Kate Grant observing that the disaster in Bangladesh had received much less coverage. Whether you intend it or not, the message you are giving loud and clear is that the lives of people in Boston are more important than those of the people of Bangladesh. This is disgraceful. Alex Marquez asked, why is the death of 3 people more important than the earthquakes in Iran or China? Is it because American lives matter more than those living in the so-called third world countries? Mohsin Aladdin wrote on a similar theme, there never seems to be this much coverage of other mass bombings in places such as Syria, Iraq, Pakistan, Nigeria, etc. Perhaps you feel that white people being killed deserve more attention. And Craig Cathcart emailed, I find it sad that there is a pecking order of the dead for the BBC. Well, with me now is the deputy head of the BBC Newsroom and editor of the News at 6 and the News at 10, James Stevenson. James, viewers understand it's not just about numbers, but perhaps you could talk us through the decision-making process on how much coverage to give the Boston Marathon over the last few days, given the concern there is about apparent disproportion.
Well, this is clearly a complex area, as your contributors have outlined. I mean, I think with the Boston bombing, the first thing to make clear is I think by any standards, it's a major story and a major event. And I think that's to do with the fact that it's the first bombing on American soil since 9/11. So in well over a decade, this is the first successful attack of its type. And I think that would alone have made it a very prominent story.
People were concerned that after a couple of days, it was apparent that it wasn't part of a major set of attacks. And some viewers felt that given the scale of what was going on in Iraq, for example, the terrorist bombings, that the BBC should have shifted its focus a lot sooner, and that the coverage they ended up getting was disproportionately then on Boston.
Yes, it became it seemed to become clear that these two individuals were acting alone. But then there were very significant and important developments in the story as the days passed, in terms of the manhunt and the unprecedented locking down of Boston, and then the tracking down of a suspect, and then the charging, and then just worth saying, obviously the wider international implications of that, with what seems to be the background in Chechnya and the parents who we've interviewed in Dagestan. So I do think it had wider ramifications and justified continuing prominent coverage. Well,
the other aspect of the coverage that's concerned some viewers is this idea that you go with rolling pictures that seem dramatic. So you had the whole manhunt story, which, you know, took over the rolling news networks. And again, the accusation is, was it proportionate? Given that you've got, you know, all these stories, you know, you've got earthquakes, the Iraq bombings, in the last couple of days, the Bangladesh factory collapse, they are not getting anything like the level of coverage, given how many people are affected. There are UK links to stories like Bangladesh and Primark. We've had reporting of the Bangladesh bombing several nights in a row, and that's clearly a horrific story which we've been covering. Likewise, last weekend we deployed correspondents to the Chinese earthquake and covered that. I mean, I think so we have been doing those other stories as well. And I think it's important to point out some of the logistical constraints. The editorial judgments obviously play their part. But for example, the big earthquake in Iran, we don't have the ability to get visas for the BBC at the moment. We can't go and report that story in the way we would like to. Remote parts of China take longer for our teams to get to. Bangladesh, these kind of places are harder to cover. And in that sense, I recognise that material from America is more readily available, and that does mean that we have to work harder in terms of deployment and working with the material we have in order to do justice to those very important stories. That's useful for viewers to appreciate. But an example where, you know, it wasn't about picture access. Wednesday 6 o'clock news had nothing on Bangladesh, but it did have time to mention the breakup of JLS. Now, people feel that's just a bad editorial judgment.
Well, people are going to question editorial judgments we make all the time. We had one brief sentence about JLS breaking up, and for a portion of our audience, that is big news. We do, as you probably know, the 6 o'clock news has a remit to focus a bit more on UK news. The 10 o'clock news has a bit more of a remit to focus on international news. I think some of these other considerations that I mentioned do come into play about how readily available the material is, how easy it is to get to the site. They do play into a mix of editorial judgments that we need to make.
James Stevenson, thank you very much. Now for some of the other topics you've been contacting us about this week. Starting with an image it's been rather hard to miss.
3 days after he sank his jaws into Branislav Ivanovic, it was now the FA's turn to show their teeth. Suarez had wanted a 3-match ban. Instead, he got 10.
That now infamous bite by Liverpool footballer Luis Suarez was replayed numerous times, drawing the ire of Bernard Castleman, who commented, "How low have we sunk these days when the BBC sees fit to give such prominence to minor events in this trashiest of games?" While Richard Wilkes, clearly more of a football fan, had a different point about Monday's news at 10. The Suarez biting story got 2 minutes coverage, focusing on a negative disciplinary issue. Manchester United winning the Premiership, the most watched football league in the world for a 20th time, received only 90 seconds. Can't you make the news a bit more positive? There was little positive about a report from Jeremy Bowen on Tuesday's news at 10 from Syria, in which he met a kidnap victim of the conflict there who had had his finger chopped off and sent to his family, along with a video of the event, some of which the BBC showed, much to the distress of Polly Irvin, who wrote, "It's not in the public interest to see and hear such horrors. We all know the world is a frightening place, and your duty is to inform without fueling the fires of panic and despair. I'll never forget the noise of the blade and the whimpering of the victim. How does that help anyone at all? Certainly not the poor man himself, who was also filmed reliving the horror as the footage played. An anodyne announcement that there were strong images coming up was utterly inadequate." Finally, it's been 6 weeks now since BBC One News Bulletins and the News Channel moved to a new home in central London, and the backdrop showing staff working hard in the newsroom behind the presenters continues to attract comment. Viewer Ian Boyle is enjoying it, although not perhaps in the way intended. Here he is to explain why.
Really fascinated by the guys coming up and down with their coffee down the stairs, and watching the different screens. And there was a woman with a new coat, and she bought some flowers for someone. I just wondered who the flowers were for. And all those screens are so interesting. I was just trying to make out what they were all saying. And it's just a pity, really, that there's someone in front of the set reading out the news. I was just wondering whether you couldn't just persuade them to move over to one side so we could actually see the set properly.
Thank you for that helpful suggestion, Ian. And thanks for all your comments this week. If you want to share your opinions on BBC News and Current Affairs or even appear on the programme, you can call us on 0370 010 6676 or email newswatch@bbc.co.uk. You can find us on Twitter @NewsWatchBBC, and you can watch previous discussions by searching topics on our programme archive on the website bbc.co.uk/newswatch. That's all from us. We'll be back to hear your thoughts about BBC News coverage again next week. Goodbye.
Hello there. I think that was me walking up the stairs in the background then, but it definitely wasn't me with the coat. However, you will need a coat over the course of the weekend because it's definitely on the chilly side. Temperatures are going to be falling away by night and it's staying chilly by day. There'll be some rain around, but most of us will have one dry day. But gardeners, take note, a touch of frost is expected in some places. Now, we started off with rain across the south-east and East Anglia. That weather front has cleared away, that cloud. There's been some sunshine falling on behind, but there's been a whole raft of heavy, in places thundery showers. Still some lively downpours now, particularly across the West Midlands and Lancashire. They'll fizzle out in these areas, but we'll keep some going across the west of Wales, and Devon and Cornwall keep some just edging in across eastern counties of England. For many, though, it'll turn dry and clear and cold, 2 or 3 in towns and cities. A touch of frost is possible in rural parts of Scotland and a much colder night across the south. Certainly it'll be a cold start to the weekend across Scotland and Northern Ireland, but it should be a cracking start as well. Plenty of blue sky around here. There'll be some sunny spells across northwest England. A few showers are likely for a time across northeast England, although they should be fizzling out. Generally a dry and a bright start too across Wales. Still a few showers just grazing perhaps Pembrokeshire and down into Cornwall. But most of southwest England also having a sunny Saturday morning. Further east there could be some sunny intervals, but there'll be a whole host of showers across Lincolnshire, East Anglia and the southeast. And again, some lively ones possible. A rumble of thunder can't be ruled out. The showers tend to edge further south during the day, so we will see maybe a few in South Wales and southwest England by the afternoon. We won't see as many by the afternoon across Lincolnshire and much of northern England looking dry. It stays fine across Scotland and Northern Ireland, but even with some sun, 11 or 12 at the very best, and it really will feel cold on those North Sea coasts. Single digits here, and temperatures fall away again on Saturday night. Suggestions, we may well get a frost in rural parts across the heart of the country and possibly parts of the south too. Further north, it's not as cold because we have another change for Sunday. A weather front arrives, bringing clouds, outbreaks of rain, and also the isobars squeezing together, suggesting the winds are also going to pick up. So a blustery start for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Turns brighter here with sunshine and showers by the afternoon. Outbreaks of rain creeping across England and Wales, but I suspect East Anglia and the southeast will generally stay dry and bright throughout the day. Temperatures, though, still at or below average for the time of year. It's definitely going to be a chilly weekend. As I said, gardeners, take note, the risk of overnight frost. More details on all of that on the BBC weather website.
What will everyone be talking about tomorrow?
With BBC News, you don't need to wait to find out.
We'll tell you which stories are making the front pages.
And explore the stories behind the headlines.
That's The Papers with me, Clive Myrie.
Or me, Martine Croxall, and our panel of expert guests.
Every night after the news at 10 on the BBC News Channel.